going to present my study that just came out on real-time dialogue between experimenters and dreamers in REM sleep. So as you can see by the extensive list of authors, this was actually a super collaborative study with 4 different labs in 4 different countries. And so there's 5 people that are actually the first author on the paper who all contributed independent data sets, and we combined them all together for the study. So first, what we did was we induced lucid dreams in our participants, and each team did this in a different way. So in the German group and the French group, they used experienced lucid dreamers. So the German group used people who had at least 35 lucid dreams in their life, recruited on online forums and stuff. And then the French team used a participant with narcolepsy, which is a sleep disorder when you can enter straight into REM sleep. And so people with narcolepsy have more lucid dreams. So the French group actually only had 1 participant who just had a ton of lucid dreams in the lab. And then our group and the Dutch group used a method that we recently developed called targeted lucidity reactivation. So in this study, here, that was kind of where we tested this method and developed it. And 50% of participants had a lucid dream in a single 90-minute morning nap. So this is what that method looks like. Participants come into the lab in the morning for a sleep study. And then while we're wiring them up to electrodes, we explain lucid dreaming. So in this original study, it was really like, how little do we need? Like, could we really have lucid dreams in 2 hours with no prior experience? So some people knew about it, but some people didn't. So we just talked about it while we were wiring them up. And then before people went to sleep, we did this kind of accelerated training where we associated a sound or a light cue with a lucid state of mind. So we'd play a sound cue that just sounded like this, boop, 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 or flashing lights. And then we'd give them this kind of meditation prompt, like, it goes like this: as you notice the cue, you become lucid. Bring your attention to your thoughts. Notice where your mind has wandered. And it goes on. And then we'll do that. And we'll do that like 4 or 5 times. And then after that, we just present the cues and say, every time you see or hear this cue, become lucid, to try to make that strong association. And then when people go to sleep and enter REM sleep, right away, we start presenting the cues again every like 30-ish seconds. And then we tell people to give us that signal if they become lucid. So that's also what we did for the 2-way study. Okay, and so here in the 2-way study, we had 35 participants and 57 sessions with REM sleep. This is across all the teams. And then 15 sessions with signal verified lucid dreams. So Brian already explained this, but this slide explains it again. Person's laying here, they look left, right, left, right, left, right. And during wake, that looks like this. So you can see these big deflections in the eye channels 3 times. And then during REM sleep, you can see that there are those big deflections again, but they're paralyzed. Their brain waves are a little bit more flatter. And also you can see over here, these are not lucid eye movements, and they're really different from the lucid eye movements. So in this study, what we did was after participants signaled that they were lucid, ideally, or sometimes if they didn't, we just tried to ask questions anyway. So we would ask questions. So the French team asked yes or no questions, and then the US and German teams and the Dutch teams all asked math problems. And so in our team, we just asked math problems by like saying them very softly to people while they were asleep, just like 1 + 2. And it was pre-recorded, so we could really carefully control the volume. And then the German team used math problems that were encoded in Morse code. So they had all their participants learn Morse code on the computer before coming in, and then they presented the either flashing lights or beeping tones in Morse code. And then the French team also used tactile stimuli. So they tapped their participants on the hand and asked, how many times did we tap you on the hand? And then to communicate out, participants used eye movements, as has been extensively discussed already, or facial muscle contractions, which is a relatively new type of communication that hasn't been used much before. So the French, they either furrowed their brow or kind of scrunched up their jaw like this, like in a kind of smile. And they found that it was a pretty reliable signal because people never did that outside of the lucid dreaming period, in comparison to like other studies, like Stephen LaBerge has done studies with like fist clenching, and that sometimes it doesn't come out as well as, so anyway, facial muscle, interesting new direction to study more. Okay, so the results. So here's an example of a participant. This is their hypnogram. So they were awake and then they went through all the sleep stages. And now here at the end, they're in REM sleep. So we gave them a lucid cue. That's this blue line. And then we gave them math problems here on this red. So here they signal, I'm lucid, which was 3 left rights. And then we present 8 minus 6, and they answer 2, 8 minus 6, 2. And afterwards, we woke them up, and they said, I was in a parking lot. I thought, okay, this is probably a dream. We asked if they remember hearing any math problems. They said, I think I heard 3. I answered 2 for all of them. I don't remember what the first one was. I just remember the last one was 8 minus 6. And so it's kind of interesting, like throughout all the examples, people tended to remember that they did math problems, but they weren't always perfect at remembering what happened. So here he said he heard 3, but he only answered 2. We actually presented 2 more math problems that he didn't answer at all, which weren't 8 minus 6. So anyway, yeah. So how often did people answer and not answer? We had 158 communication attempts total during signal verified lucid dreams. So that means after somebody gave a lucid signal, we asked questions. And so that's 158 questions that happened during REM sleep, during signal verified lucid dreams. So 18.4% of those were answered correctly. 3.2 were incorrect. No response was 60.8%, and ambiguous responses was 17.7%. So here's an example of an ambiguous response. We asked 2 plus 4, and they gave this. It's not a clear signal. The dreamer does remember doing a signal, but we had people rate how many eye movements happened after each question. They didn't know what the question was. And if the rating was, if there was like a majority, like 3 people said 2, then we would count that answer as 2. And so here, all the raters gave different answers, and so it's counted as ambiguous. And some of these ambiguous is also that some raters thought there was an answer and some raters thought there wasn't an answer. Cool. So here's another example from the Dutch team. So they present 1 plus 2 in REM sleep, and the dreamer answers 3. And they say that the math problem came into their dream and it felt sort of like a radio in the car. Here's an example from the German team. So 4 minus 0 was presented in flashing lights in Morse code. And in the dream, the lights started flickering, and they recognized this as the flashing signal from the outside. And here's an example from the French team. They asked, do you watch football? And the dreamer gave the signal for no. And they asked, do you like chocolate? And the dreamer gave the signal for yes. And in the dream, they heard the questions as though it was God coming from the dream. Yeah. So that is my presentation. And let me know if you have any questions. Yeah, thanks for listening.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, thanks for running through that. And yeah, definitely want to open up to questions from the group here, but maybe to start with, was there anything that kind of surprised you most as you're doing the study that kind of like caught you off guard based on what you were expecting going in?
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to figure out where to put you guys. Yeah, well, I guess one thing that definitely surprised me is we were kind of not sure that like just directly talking to people. Can I stop sharing my screen? Okay, cool. We were not sure that like directly talking to people would work, because we thought that like it might get so distorted in the process of getting into a dream that people just wouldn't be able to understand us, or they wouldn't be able to answer the math problems. And so that was one thing that I was surprised by, that many people just heard the problems exactly as they were. And there wasn't even like as many beautiful examples of dream incorporation, you know, where a dream character walks up to them and asks them a math problem. A lot of it was less beautiful than that. It was like they heard it even though, and it wasn't related to the dream or something like that. So I think that kind of incorporation situation surprised me.
Yeah, and Dash, maybe you can talk about from the participant perspective. Did you answer any of these questions in the study? And if so, what was that? Like,
I was curious what I was, like you had the ambiguous answers, you had the correct answers, and I was curious what I was categorized as, because with me, I made contact. So you said, I said, oh, I see the lights, you know. For me, it was cops lights, like from a cop's flashlight. So, but I realized where I was, sent the signal. And then it was, the question was like, are you dreaming? And then I think I said yes, and then I couldn't hear, like I heard the next one, but I didn't understand it, and I just said yes, because I wanted to say make it louder, but I had no way. So I was curious, do you remember what you categorized that as?
Yes. So here, I can show Dash's example, which was great. And I often like think of your example as an example of like kind of two-way miscommunication, and that it demonstrates that a dreamer is capable of having an extremely, like, capable of being extremely coherent in a dream and really making the attempt to communicate, and yet is not quite, you know, the communication wasn't perfect. So I can show that one.
Yes, Dash, we've discussed how those lights get morphed into police cars. For me, it's a fire truck passing by. Look, everybody that's had the red lights go off come up with something different. A toaster oven glowing. I actually saw Jacob's ladder one time in a dream. And it's the rare occasion when you teach yourself that the lights mean that you're dreaming, that those type of devices work.
Yeah, I found that, like, I'm not positive about this, but I think that lights result in more interesting dream incorporation than sound. Like in the original study that we did, when it was both lights and sound gave people lucid dreams the same amount, but the lights tended to be incorporated more contextually in the dreams, where the sounds just tended to like be like more overlaid on the dreams or whatever. It was like less frequent that the sound came from a cell phone or something. Okay,
Aaron,
so here's
yes, that's cutting edge, fantastic science. I love it. Please, I'm enjoying this to death.
Thanks. So here's Dash's example. So here is a light cue that we presented, and then Dash gave the signal for I'm awake, but actually one more signal. So I'm awake was supposed to be 4 left rights, and here's 5 left rights, but basically I'm awake. And then here we were using up down to mean no. So I'm gonna show her a dream that she gave afterwards, but just to like preface, Dash did not know that, like, she didn't know what this looked like when she was giving her dream report. It was just completely, she just remembered it all. So I see a flash of lights through my closed eyes and think, oh shit, it's the cops. Then I realized it's not the cops, it's a lucid signal. I got excited and accidentally signaled left, right 4 times instead of 2. And so then here's the signal for no, and then the signal for I'm lucid. I realized that was too many. So I signaled up, down twice for no, as in no, I'm not awake, and then signaled left, right twice, as in yes, I'm lucid. So then this was like a follow-up study. So we were trying to ask other questions. So we asked, are you dreaming? Which was supposed to be the first of a different conversation. And there was a yes signal, but it was a little bit small. So we asked it again, are you dreaming? And here's a bigger yes signal. So we think, oh my gosh, we're having a great conversation. But actually what happened was Dash remembered, yes, I heard a question play over the speakers, but couldn't make out what it was saying. I didn't know how to indicate that I couldn't hear the question clearly, so I just signaled yes. And then here, I heard it again, but I couldn't make it out again. Again, I signaled yes. Then I realized it was probably the question that goes, can you hear me? Which was the test question. And I accidentally answered yes both times because I couldn't hear it. I thought, oh shoot, that's gonna mess things up. So basically, I think that it demonstrates a few things. And one of them is that a limitation is the dreamer's vocabulary. So like here, Dash had a very small vocabulary that consisted of I'm awake, I'm lucid, yes and no. And she needed to say something else, and she couldn't say it. Maybe if we were using Morse code, she could have said it, but it's kind of hard to read that in real time. So, but it also demonstrates a great example of how a dreamer can be really coherent during REM sleep, and all this stuff can happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that you had that example queued up. I don't think we even planned for that. That's awesome. And like nice point on the limited vocabulary. I've heard, actually, I think it was somebody responding to a tweet that Dash sent recently about like vocal vibrations, and like maybe that can somehow be a way to like get communication out from a lucid dream. Like, have you heard anything about that? Like kind of training somebody's like normal vocal vibrations and then like translating it?
Okay, I originally thought that that was like going to be a really great next communication out, but what I've heard since then is a lot of it. I think one reason why it hasn't been followed up on in a dream is because the muscle atonia is generated in your brainstem, and so the vocal vibrations rely on your vocal cords contracting which would probably already be blocked by the rematonia. So, but who knows? Like, I don't think it's actually been tested. That was just somebody's idea about why it wouldn't work, but maybe it will work.
Yeah, NASA did research several years ago on subvocal speech where they weren't actually literally picking up like vocal vibrations, but they had like a handful of EMG electrodes around the neck and were picking out, and were just kind of like using essentially machine learning to get a signature. And people were just saying things in their head, and they had pretty good results.
Whoa.
But it was during wake, or was it during sleep?
During wake.
Okay, yeah.
As soon as the functional magnetic resonance imaging technology shrinks down to be portable and affordable, they'll be able to pretty much tap in, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that would have to be pretty different than it is now, but that would, and maybe quieter, but like, you can say a lot more.
It's interesting that sorry, go for it.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna ask, like Dash was saying that she couldn't, I think I remember from our interview, she was saying like the questions are played out over a speaker and she was far away from the speaker, so she couldn't hear it. So do you think you would get quite different results or better results if, like, say everyone had a headset on or that kind of thing?
Well, what we do is before sleep, we calculate their minimum auditory threshold. So like people sit there and we gradually increase the volume until we can say what's the very quietest you can hear, and then we increase it some more and say what's comfortable. And so I think that an actual issue in the example that I showed you with Dash is that I was asking questions that I hadn't directly tested, and so I think the threshold was slightly different, and I think that that was actually a problem and kind of like a lame reason why she couldn't hear it. It would be like way cooler if it was because of sensory disconnection during sleep or something. But I do think that one interesting thing that we haven't tried that has been proposed is bone conduction headphones, because people—
That's what I was about to bring up.
So it would be interesting to do a study
Bone
testing
conduction.
that. They sound more like they're from inside your head, and maybe that helps you not wake up or something.
Now, Karen, I've talked with people at workshops, and I understand that the olfactory sense is not regulated by the thalamus in the same way. So getting information in through the nose is a key way. A girl I met put her stinky garbage can next to her bed, and that was all it took. She smelled it, and boom, she was in a lucid dream. So that's an avenue worth investigating for sure.
There's been some studies on that. So Daniel Urlacher recently came out with a study about trying to do that, and I don't think that it worked very well, interestingly, because smell does work for other like sleep stimulation studies with memory and stuff like that. But I think that there's a little bit of a I think that there's good anecdotal examples, but there's a little bit of iffy literature on smell incorporation in dreams. Like, I think that some of the most, there's not a lot of studies on it, but like the only one that I can really think of that had significant results.
I'll watch for your next PhD.
The emotion.
Yeah, I'll watch for it, Karen.
Be called Dash by the garbage can.
Karen, I'm curious, when you guys were doing the targeted lucidity reactivation, what percentage of people, so you're getting like 50% of the people that were having lucid dreams, what percentage of wake-ups were there in there, in terms of like sleep disturbances?
Right. So in the targeted lucidity reactivation experiment, the original one, we didn't calculate that directly, but I don't know, actually. It'd be interesting because some people definitely did wake up from the queue, I think. And then if they went back to sleep, then we queued them again. In the two-way study, we also didn't look at that, but recently got asked the question. So I was kind of looking at it more casually. And what tended to happen was that people entered REM sleep and we presented questions, and they would eventually wake up at the end. And sometimes they woke up sooner. And at the end, if they didn't wake up, then we would wake them up. So it's kind of a little bit difficult to say, like, how often the stimulation actually woke them up. But the basic answer I have is that it definitely did sometimes, but not all of the time. So like, not every time somebody didn't respond, it wasn't always because they woke up, but sometimes they did wake up. And I kind of feel like if like, I feel like the bigger problem is when you present it and they don't hear it or wake up. I feel like you can kind of do things to help people not wake up. I feel like you can reduce the intensity, blah, 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 but it's kind of harder to say, how do you actually get somebody to perceive something during sleep when they're not perceiving it?
Do you see indications on the polysomnograph that somebody's about to wake up?
Yes. And yeah, and Stephen LeBurge recommended something that I've been trying to implement I just don't have a heart rate monitor, but he said that if you present sounds at different levels, you could tell on the heart rate before the PSG when someone's going to wake up. So that might be something that's even easier to implement in tech than it is in the lab. Not that it should.
Does the heart rate increase, or does it become, or is there a change in the variability? What's the signature?
I'm not sure. I know that the heart rate variability increases when you're in REM, but I think that the actual heart rate increases. But that might be something you could look more into, because I haven't directly tested it myself, because sometimes the heart rate just doesn't show up when I put electrodes.
Yeah, and good questions. I think Jay might have had a question, and I see Steve has his hand up too. I don't know, Jay, if you still have one, or
yeah. I mean, just before the question, my comment about the bone conduction. In my tests, the problem with at least the ones I've tried that are on your temples or something like that for bone conduction is that they do produce audible audio. Maybe that's not a negative necessarily, but they weren't optimal as the ones I remembered from like high school experiment, which is if you're doing it through the teeth, it really sounds like it's coming from inside your head, like it's somebody's talking in your head, and it wasn't like I couldn't hear it with my ears. And I know that there are devices for people hard of hearing that are using like a tooth kind of implant, but that's not something I think you could do while people are sleeping and might accidentally swallow it or something. So yeah. I don't know, but it's definitely something I've looked into, and I think is still worth looking into. My question is, was there, other than, I mean, this is incredible. I think even just the statistics of the number of people you've had in under EEG in a sleep lab, lucid dreaming alone was worth the experiment, let alone everything else that you indicated. But was there like a particular goal in mind that you thought that this would lead to more research in the future, or some specific application?
Yeah, well, I think that, like Brian, I'm most interested in the applications for like consciousness research, but I think in a little bit of like, I think even before you get to the woo-woo stuff, you could like do, like, I'm hoping that like you could translate like a lot of psychology experiments that are normally done on people who are awake, like working memory tasks and long-term memory tasks and, perception tasks and stuff. And I think you could translate those to people who are dreaming and like give them those tasks while they're dreaming. And then you could like characterize how consciousness is different in another state, which I think could be helpful for like understanding how consciousness is overall in relationship to the brain. So that's
fantastic. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, very cool. Steve, I see you have your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. How much of the data, or referring back to your chart, Karen, how much of the data is automatically collected versus manually typed in by somebody who is an observer of the process?
Right. So all of the data in our study that was published in the paper was recorded on EEG. So we had all the EEG saved. And then we actually had a fifth team from Russia that was originally on the paper. And so when we submitted it, we had to that's when we got the blind reviewers to go through and say all of this happened during REM sleep, and also all of the signals are what we thought they were. So the Russian team didn't want to submit all of their data, which was admittedly a lot of work. So they ended up not being on the paper. So everything that you see in the paper was objectively recorded and then looked at by 6 different people who were saying what happened.
Okay. I don't have the same technical background. Actually, I write enterprise software, but I don't have the same dream technical background as the rest of you. But so the portion where if you're recording my sleep pattern, this device knows when I enter REM and it knows when I'm lucid dreaming, yes?
Well, actually, recording your brains and then brainwaves, and then an experimenter is looking at it and determining when you're in REM and when you're lucid dreaming.
I know my watch tells me that I've had REM sleep during a certain period of time at nighttime. Is it similar to that at all?
Yes, it is similar. It's a little bit like there's not a one-to-one correspondence between what the like wearables say and what is PSG says, because the sleep rules are really weird, and probably most of the time it doesn't really matter. But if you're saying like somebody was in REM sleep in this 20 seconds when this communication took place, then it becomes like very relevant for scientific purposes.
And the last question I have, and this may sound like a really mundane thing compared to what you're talking about globally and et cetera. Can this process, or what we're talking about here, somehow send a message to a friend of mine that I have entered REM or a lucid dream, or potentially that case, so that person can interact with me? That's the reason we came to this presentation in the first place anyway. And even though it sounds mundane, it probably could become the largest aspect of the experiment anyway. But is there anything here that would allow me to zap a message over to that person saying I'm in this position, and have that person write back and ask me questions?
I think that,
but not questions that I don't want to answer.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that would be something that would be really cool to do down the line. I mean, right now it can still be a little hard for just a dreamer to communicate with somebody who's awake, but I do think that is a really interesting application. And Stephen LaBerge, had the idea of having two dreamers in a lucid dream at the same time, and then like meeting in a room, and like one draws a shape with their hand and they both follow it with their eyes. And then if their eyes are doing the same thing at the same time, you can say that consciousness exists outside of your body. So nobody's done that yet, but maybe you could. That'd be cool.
Okay. Yeah, but imagine the implications on when that happens. Like our understanding of reality totally shift when you're like, man, I can communicate with other people like across the world. that just kind of shows like some of the implications here. And as far as like sending out messages, I think when Dashiell talks about her project, she's has a goal of sending out a tweet from within a lucid dream. So you can imagine, like, instead of sending a message on Twitter, sending a message to a friend, or having some kind of trigger to then initiate lucidity in somebody else by like initiating some kind of like stimulation, like from somebody across the world. And then, there can be a message attached like, hey, come find me in the dreamscape. So
Steve,
I think
Steve,
totally
it's
possible.
really a lot easier than you think. The mask I have now is fully capable of doing that. It sends messages through a COM port to a computer that can be relayed to anyone. What Dash is doing is actually sending it over text messages. So it's here and now, and we'll talk more. We'll talk more about that.
Yeah, I was curious about the nature of the data, whether it's JSON data or text data, et cetera. It'd be interesting to see what you could do with the data.
Yeah. So a lot of potential there for this kind of interactive dreaming. And Karen, when you're kind of assessing when to send the message, was it pretty much just okay, after a certain amount of time of them being in an REM sleep stage, then send the signal? Or are you looking at like kind of more nuanced signals in the EEG and other various sensors that are on the PPG or PSG?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what we did for this one was to send lucid signals. We waited until basically they had their first eye movement, because it can be kind of hard to capture REM in the lab. So we wanted to like maximize our queuing in REM time. So I'd play lucid signals, and I'd play like 10 of them or something. And ideally the participant would give a lucid eye signal from the dream, and then I'd start presenting questions, and I'd present some. And then if they seemed to wake up a little bit, or they seemed like their sleep was less stable, which you can kind of tell from the brainwaves, then I'd pause until it seemed more stable. It's always kind of a guessing game. Like, if you think they give a response, you should wake them up, or should you keep sleeping? But I do think that something I really hope we can work on in the future is using machine learning to decode like when somebody might be able to answer, because there's a lot of times we presented a question and they weren't able to answer. They'd wake up or they wouldn't hear it. And so it'd be really cool to like use some machine learning on the EEG to say like, okay, now is the perfect time, they'll hear you. I have no idea like what really that would be, but that's what I dream of. So
it's like when you're on Slack or some inter-office messenger, like you get the little green circle indicating like I'm available. Like now you can send me a message. But yeah, based on like those signals from the sensors.
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of studies coming out lately about like how there's more sensory disconnection, like you're more blocked from the outside world while you're having the eye movements themselves. And so like we haven't directly tested it, but it'd be kind of interesting to see like there's long periods of REM where you don't have eye movements, and those might be like very critical for getting stuff incorporated in dreams.
Nice.
I wonder if
sorry. maybe you just said it, but did when you were like figuring out when to trigger the lights, there was like a time when you could tell that the participant was more likely to see the lights?
No, but yeah, we just wait until they were in steady REM and then we do the lights.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe I'm thinking of something else, but I thought you had said that there was something about if like the visual cortex had like less activity or something like that, something that implied that there was less visuals in the dream.
Yes, well, that was for a specific study, but that was like, you can see this brainwave in the back of your brain that indicates that you're waking up, but it also happens when you close your eyes when you're awake, and so that is possibly what you're talking about.
Oh,
Right?
I don't know. I think it was something else, but I don't know. Maybe I'm remembering wrong.
Sorry.
I thought I'd ask you like, can you like figure out this perfect time to flash the light? And you had said something about watching for some signal that implied there was less visual activity in my dream, but now I don't know what it was. Doesn't sound right.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. I don't remember saying that, but it's kind of interesting. I mean, I guess if you have a lot of those brainwaves, then there could be less visual activity in your dream, and maybe that would be probably a bad time to present the light because then you'd be more awake. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, cool.
Maybe you told Dash in a dream.
I don't know. It was like a good theory too. It was like that if you see an explosion in your dream, you won't be able to see the lights. So I don't know where it came.
Right.
Yeah.
So that probably actually relates to what I was saying about the eye movement. So people think that when you make an eye movement in a dream, it relates to like a more exciting thing happening in your dream and blocks the sensory disconnection. So that might be it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Were you I think Jay has a question too. Then I got a follow-up question.
Yeah, I was wondering, I'm trying to remember I think there was a study about how when you're sleeping in a bed that you're not used to or in a place that you're not used to, the brain maintains a little more awakeness to be able to kind of gauge the environment. I wonder if that actually contributes coincidentally to being able to do some of these research in a lab or.
Yeah, I think that it actually might. And we're trying to turn this method into an app, which is like not very high tech at the moment. And it's lower tech, so we're not detecting REM, but it also isn't working as well as it does in the lab. And so like, it's kind of interesting to think about like part of it might be that you're in a new environment and you're focused on lucid dreaming. And so if you can actually fall asleep, there's a couple other variables besides just the sensory stimulation and the training.
Yeah, that makes sense. I see Lana's got her hand up too.
Yeah, so there's a question in the chat and it kind of relates to the direction I'm looking to take some of my research. So the question in the chat from Robert is, he's wondering about the limitations of the brain and what it can answer and do whilst in REM, and like, getting short answers from participants, but how long can you stay on a question? And that ties into my questions with my research is on lucid dreaming for mitigating depression. And I think I was talking with Dash about, the concept of would it be possible to, even coach people whilst they're lucid or ask them questions and get them to think about their emotions or, like have those longer format conversations whilst you're in that kind of lucid dream space. So yeah, I'm curious about if you know more about that or why currently like answers are just set on yes, no, or like very short format things.
Right. Yeah.
Have you talked with Kristen Lamarca about that? That's her specialty. And she's doing wonderful things in that arena. It's comparable to some of the new immersion therapy that's better for some people than others. But if you haven't spoken with Kristen, yes, I think you would really enjoy that conversation.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the therapy is like a really cool idea. I put it on my slides, although I haven't done anything, remotely related to that yet. But I do think that or PTSD or people who have nightmares or something, I think that's a really cool application of this, is that you could maybe have that conversation. And so right now, I think Dash might have a different answer to this because she can do Morse code. But right now, the reason the answers are short is because dreamers have to memorize the response code. So I don't know, right? We could say say yes, no 50 times or something. I don't know if maybe they could do that, but really what's limiting it is just people trying to remember all these different codes and stuff. And so that Chris FL has a new idea where if you have an iPhone, you can swipe your answer. And so that is something that he's working on that some of you might know about, where you move your eyes as though you were typing on a keyboard, and then you can decode that. But I think that's still in preliminary stages. So, but the whole question of how much information, how is your working memory in a dream? Maybe it's worse. And it's really interesting to test. I think even if it was worse, I think that there's a lot of interesting things around that you could learn from. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, very cool. That's got to be one of the best applications of this kind of interactive dreaming. And I think nightmares, even that got into the AASM guidelines around lucid dreaming being one of the solutions for that. So it's at least starting to go mainstream a bit more. Yeah, Karen, I don't know. I want to get to Dash pretty soon here too, and hopefully we can still have a good kind of interplay with Karen and Dash, and as Dash is talking through her Dream Phone project. But when you guys were doing this study, were you considering other types of stimulation other than light and sounds, or the tactile that I think it was the French group did the tactile? Were you thinking of other kind of electrical stimulation or other types of things?
Right. So so the lab that I'm in now specializes in sound during sleep. So actually, when we did our participants with the math problems, we didn't even use lights. We just used sounds to induce lucid dreams, because it's kind of a lower risk situation. And I think some of the electrical stimulation, the 40 hertz thing to the forehead has kind of been debunked a little bit. And so I think that there are probably other electrical stimulations that you could do. But the reason we did this one is because in one study it worked so well. We were let's just use this forever. And I think it worked really well in the first study, maybe not as well in subsequent studies. But yeah, electrical stimulation is just kind of a different topic, but it would be cool to do that too, or somebody else do that.
Yeah, and any just kind of general tips as you worked through this for people that are developing their own lucid dreaming devices, whether they're on the call or elsewhere, any kind of lessons learned that you would kind of pass along to them? Yeah.
Well, I guess just one note about the electrical stimulation that is a little bit iffy is that the EEG correlates of lucid dreaming are very unclear. They're not replicated from study to study, what brainwaves even relate to lucid dreaming. And I think there might be different types of lucid dreaming. And so I think that's another thing that kind of held us back from electrical stimulation, is that it's not even really clear what kind of stimulation you would need.
Do you have any best indications that you see on EEG or otherwise when people are lucid?
What I use is the eye movement signals, or we started doing sniffing signals. So I think that sniffing signals are way better. I think that sometimes eye movement signals wake people up, or they mess up the dream imagery. So we've been doing sniffing. And
what's the sniffing?
So we use a nasal cannula. We just started, and we haven't published anything on it yet. So nobody published anything on it yet before me. And so we put a nasal cannula in their nose, and then breathing, I think, has been done before, but not specifically sniffing. And so it's an extremely clear signal. You can just see it on the EEG, and when they're in REM sleep, they're just breathing in and out. And then if you just go, it looks super spiky, or just. And so we're using that now, because also then you could maybe do more experiments with visual stimuli.
That's really cool. But there's no those are all conscious, intentional things. Right. Or there's nothing on EEG that you would say this might be an indication.
synopsis of the literature is that there's two different ideas about that. So some people, like Ursula Voss and the 40 Hertz stimulation, think that lucid dreaming is a combined state between wake and REM sleep, and there's more wake-like brain activity. There's one study that there's more alpha, which is from wake. There's that finding that there's more gamma, which some other studies haven't replicated. There's some studies that there's less slow waves, which is another indication that is more like wake. And so that's one hypothesis, is between REM sleep and wake. But there's another hypothesis that I think is favored by Stephen LaBerge, which is that it is a particularly deep state of REM sleep. And so it's kind of weird because deep REM sleep is more activated, and activated is kind of like wake anyway. But like, he finds that people have, it's just a normal state of like particularly deep REM sleep that everybody goes into. And if you have the right mental set, then you have a lucid dream. And so my reconciliation of these two hypotheses is that there's probably different types of lucid dreaming. I think Stephen studied people that became lucid on their own. And so they were in deep phasic REM sleep, and they gave the eye signal in deep phasic REM sleep, and they had nice, stable lucid dreams. And I think that some lucid dreams induced by sensory stimulation might be a different type, where the brain is woken up slightly or something. And that, so, and then I've also seen people in lucid dreams that are like really awake, and they report being in a lucid dream and stuff. So I think that there's a lot of different physiology that could underlie the experience of lucid dreaming. I don't think it's just one unified thing.
That's interesting, Karen. You know, we've all been watching this I-band device out of Northern Europe that supposedly uses some type of EEG monitoring to detect the dream state and then send the triggers. Now, I haven't seen any reviews on it, but according to what you said in your study, that wasn't even an issue. You just started flashing the lights randomly. You weren't watching. You just assumed they were in REM state, correct?
No, we were watching. And so, yeah, I was, you know, you have to wake up really early and watch the EEG. So it's easy to tell when somebody's in REM sleep. That's pretty, like, is pretty objective, and a lot of sleep researchers would know how to identify that. What's difficult is trying to tell if somebody's in a lucid dream if they don't signal. But we waited till REM sleep to trigger it, and that makes sense that they could detect REM sleep and then send a trigger.
I get it, but I'm just looking for a way to indicate the dream state itself, and then use that as a trigger to launch whatever stimulus that may work. Thank you. That's fascinating.
It seems like, if nothing else, like being able to indicate when somebody's in a lucid dream, you're able to label the data as far as like, this is, you know, a lucid dream versus a regular REM sleep stage. And like, maybe that's the first step to then, you know, build these models with all the different sensor streams.
Yeah. And there are some studies of that. So I think that they maybe need to be aggregated or something. But yeah, that's the issue, is that when you do that, they all come out slightly differently. So
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And yeah, want to get over to Dash, but maybe like last question for Karen. And again, Karen, feel free to stay and like interact in the next session too. And maybe this can just be like my kind of stock question, but what do you think? How do you think the world changes if suddenly like lucid dreaming becomes on demand, as far as like if there's a device or a supplement that like anybody takes it and they're able to become lucid any night? Like how do you think the world will change?
Well, I think that it depends on, you know, I guess, you know, if actually the whole thing about remotely communicating with consciousness worked out scientifically and you could prove that with lucid dreaming, I think that would be really amazing. That would be a change. But I don't, like, if that application actually worked because people could have more lucid dreams, then I think that would change our understanding of everything quite a bit. But it'll be interesting to see if that does turn out, or maybe if there's some other conditions that need to be met also. But yeah, I mean, my favorite application is just learning about yourself. So I think more people could do